I'm an INFJ or ENFJ. That means I should have like a whole 5 to 10 year plan about life, right? Not exactly. See, I've been noticing a pattern from a lot of NFJs, especially INFJs that I've been speaking to in coaching, where they're like, okay, I do believe that I'm an INFJ, but I have a hard time, honestly, with that whole future planning process. And I think that's why sometimes I can probably alter on the P, but I know that I'm not an INFP. I'm not using extrovert intuition or this, that. Am I an ISFP instead? But I also feel like, my sensation is not that high up. So they're just like thinking of all of these different things. It's like, oh, and I know I don't use FI, so what's going on here? Am I ISFJ? But I don't know. And it's like, oh man, it's sad that, we've made introvert intuition like almost that one dimensional, that if people cannot necessarily plan for the future in a certain way, if they don't have this like visionary goal, then it's like, okay, then you're definitely not an NJ. And we definitely do have a lot of NJ types out there that are not really NJ types. So there's that. We all know that the internet, in a type world, is infamous for breeding people who believe that they're INFJ when they're really not INFJ because they've been misinformed, or because they misinformed a test, or the test itself was just not really good. All of these stereotypes. Oh, I just want to be the rarest type, which, fun fact, INFJ is not actually the rarest type right now. So if that was your reason as to why you wanted to be one, now you could let that go. But that's a story for another day. It's actually the ENTJ, from what I recall in a recent article from Susan Storm. But anyway, this video is to address the issue or the thought that introverted intuition, if it's like in your dominant or auxiliary function, it is always going to have this like future visionary plan, which in actuality is just not the case. So, like I said, I've had a lot of INFJs bring this issue up to me on how, their introvert intuition doesn't really work like that. And that's the thing. There are different facets to introverted intuition. There are different ways in how we can use it. And depending on who we are as an individual, depending on how much work we've put into it, depending on just, like sometimes even Enneagram type, or even just our Myers-Briggs type in general. An NTJ is going to use their introverted intuition differently than an NFJ is going to use it. Then that's going to produce a lot of things. From what I found, the true visionary types, and this is like kind of like just my perspective, the true visionary types would be the NTJs, and then the ENFJ, and then the INFJ. And to me, the way that I've seen this, at least like in practice, is because introverted intuition itself is very concerned with the idea of future pacing, but that's going to be different from future planning. In order to actually plan, you have to implement a extroverted judging function. So if you are using NI in a higher stack, then that means that you're going to need to use TE or FE in order to implement an actual plan. And this is why also a lot of types in fiction, or even just people in general, they get things kind of like mixed up, they because they see this like, oh, well, this person like has everything like planned out in this way, they must be an NI dominant, because they thought so far ahead, when in actuality it's like, well, or they are very good with their extroverted judging function, whether it's FE or TE that they're using, and then they've just also like allowed their NI to be able to push that, to be able to make their plan, so it's an equal kind of thing that's going on. But the reason why I say that the NTJs are, if anything, more of the visionary types, and at least the stereotypical sense of the word, is because NTJs are using TE, extroverted thinking, to be able to implement all of their visions and their plans. And TE does not have to do with people. TE is more of a proactive thing. TE is like, okay, I'm going to create this system, I'm going to do this. It kind of wants to make things be set and done. So if anything, TE is more like the person or the machine, the person who comes, creates a whole system or machine or whatever it might be, and then they leave. And then you do not really need them until the thing breaks apart or until there's like a malfunction. And they come back and they're like, okay, what's wrong with this system? Because I just kind of wanted to set the system and then bounce. That's what TE pretty much does. And then every once in a while they'll come back and they'll ameliorate the system. But they're trying to like set something proactively, and then they can just kind of like leave. So it doesn't really have to wait, for like people and how they'll feel about things and all of that. In fact, TE again does not need other people. So if anything, they are way less restricted a lot of times, and they can just kind of like focus on whatever they want for themselves in a way. Their FI is just there, and then they just go for it. Now, when it comes to NFJs, there's a difference there. So the TE users, they're usually having the future planning. And again, there's spillover, there's overlap. So don't make this very dichotomous where it's like, oh, well, I'm focused more on future planning, so am I really NTJ? That's not 100% what I'm saying. But there's just a tendency where the INTJs and the ENTJs are more focused on future planning, whereas the NFJs, the ENFJ and the INFJ, they're more focused on future pacing, and their skill is actually more focused on being able to get into other people's heads. The reason why this is because FE, unlike TE, does need people. FE is involved with people. FE is responsive in nature. It's not really proactive. FE needs to be able to wait until it sees that there's other people that need this need. And so until you see that there's a need that needs to be met, then you can't really act. You have to wait until the need is actually already showing itself, or if it's already pretty much like there, So a lot of times we can try to be proactive by getting into the head or into the mind of somebody else or a group of people and seeing ahead like, okay, down the road, they're going to need this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to do this and do that and do that. But sometimes, because as much as we are thinking ahead and everything, people are fickle. That's just the truth of the matter. You almost never really 100% know how people are going to be, especially when you start dealing with bigger and bigger and bigger groups of people. Your predictions can only go so far. You can only allow yourself to be able to think so far. So instead, what NFJs tend to do is they just tend to future pace, as in they'll run simulations the whole time. I talked about this one time in a spontaneous speaking video, where in my head, all I'm always like ever doing is running a simulation. And that's what introvert intuition does. There is a scene from the show Regular Time. I think it's Regular Time, yes. Regular Time, where they're talking about the fifth dimension. Now, I don't know if this is the actual concept of what the fifth dimension might be, but I love this scene that they placed in the show, which pretty much was indicating how as soon as, pretty much because Mordecai and I think his name was Rigby, they're both pretty impulsive people. They're definitely perceivers. Not that all perceivers are impulsive, but yeah, the way that they're definitely perceivers, and it's kind of like as soon as they have a feeling for something, or as soon as they want to kind of like do something, then they just jump and do it. But when they got into the fifth dimension, then there was this area where right before they do anything, like if Rigby's like, oh, I want to like go up this elevator into that store, then he would be stopped because they were on a time crunch and they had to like achieve a mission. But then this like ghost spirit of his or something will leap out from him and would play out that whole scenario of like, what if he did go up into the elevator and what would he do? So now there's a version of him that actually did follow through with whatever he did. And then this continued to happen to where they were able to watch those versions of themselves that would have made that impulsive move. And that is how, honestly, I feel like that is a perfect example of NI, and how it's being used.
Whoa, dude, they have Froyo here. We should totally get Froyo after this. What was that?
In the fifth dimension, you can see all of your possible paths, even ones you don't choose to do. Don't dilly-dally. The longer you stay, the more complicated things will become. Good luck.
This is not to say that, NE users never do this, but it's pretty uncommon for how they do it, and they do it in a different way. But for high stacked NI users, this is what they're always constantly doing, whether it comes to conversations, whether it comes to like running out of system, whether it comes to, implementing whatever. For me, a lot of times I have my spoken words and my speeches that I gave in class. I have a playlist where I shared some of the speeches that I gave in class back when I was in college. And I never practiced for any of those. At least not outwardly. I never really actually rehearsed for my spoken words and for anything like that. It was mainly that I would envision it and I would play it in my head. I'd run the simulation in my head, and I talk more about this in that spontaneous speaking video like I told y'all. But yes, as an NI user, you're always running these simulations in your head. And then after you watch that version of yourself go and do whatever that it's going to do, and you see the good that it did or the bad that it did, how that played out, that's when you're like, and then you're like, okay, I just watched these 3 or 4 or however many versions of myself go and do this, and now I know which one to actually follow, or if I have to create a 5th one. And over time, you become a lot quicker at this, but at the same time, you know that because, again, people is what you're dealing with, then you have to wait until certain people do certain things, or they say certain things, or they have a certain need before you can launch your plan. Until that need comes up as an FE user, you're honestly limited because, again, we're being responsive. So if the TE user is trying to set a system and then kind of be done with it and leave until they have to come back and then repair it, the FE user is the person who has to sit back and then, water these seeds, water these plants. And I'm always talking about watering seeds on my channel, but that's because that's kind of like what FE is doing. FE is about responsiveness. FE is paying attention to what do the people need. And so if you are looking and paying attention to what the people need, people's needs, sometimes they come up randomly, especially once again, if you're dealing with a big group of people. You might not always know what they're going to need in advance. And sometimes if you give people what they need too early, then that can offset something, So you have to wait until their need actually becomes a need before you give it to them. And that's why a lot of times, it's like, okay, I've run this future pace of how this might play out, but I don't really have like a 10-year visionary plan because I can't predict 10 years exactly what people will need. Or even if I do predict it in some way, I cannot implement that plan. I cannot, set forth with that plan until it becomes an actual need in society. Because that's just, again, how people work. And if you put out that, solution or that solvent for that need too early, then it's going to, in a way, diffuse itself. And it won't be it won't work. It'll be ineffective. So that is why NI, at least in the NFJ, might not always come off as visionary in the sense of I have this whole 10-year plan. Rather, it could come off way more in the sense of visionary in the sense that like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., where he envisioned, he was like, okay, I have a dream. I have this vision of what I want society to be like. And now I want to like work towards bringing that into fruition, even if I do not get there. In Dario Nardi's book, The Magic Diamond, he talks about how each function looks like when it's in a very straight form, and then when it's in a very diffusable or flexible form. So there's like the analytic brain, which is often in business, law, science, or technology, and then the holistic brain, which is often in the arts, humanities, or social service. Neither of these fashions of how a function works is better than the other. It's just what Dario Nardi, who, by the way, for those of you who don't know, he's a famous neurologist that's really into Myers-Briggs, and he's been into like brain scans and all of that. He has several books out on everything. He's an INTJ. This is just what he found for each type, and if anything, he says that it's good to try to develop both. So I'm only going to read to you some aspects of the introverted intuition side of things, and I'm going to read to you what the analytic brain is for introverted intuition, and the holistic brain is for introverted intuition. Now, I want you guys to remember that there's no one that's better than the other, but rather, if you see yourself more in one side, then you have to try to also learn to implement the other side, because that's when you're going to, like, at least if you're interested in development, that's when you're going to really tap into, okay, this is the best ways on how I can use this function to the most effective ability. So, visionary NI, or analytic brain NI, is active, focused, and fixed. Again, it's often found in business, law, science, or technology. It sticks to a singular vision of the future to improve self and society. It's certain of a few compelling insights, and it doesn't let go or water down. It turns realizations into principles and applies many complex concepts, also acts as a guiding spirit. Now, when we look at Oracle NI, which is the holistic version of NI, it's very receptive, it diffuses, and it's flexible. It's often found in the arts, humanities, or social services. So Oracle NI users hold lightly many interrelated insights, connect to the many facets of the archetypal world, open to transformation, respond to others' questions, and innovate for the group, cultivate an aesthetic or spiritual practice. So, again, the goal is to try to find a balance between these two types of NI, but each of us always lean more into one or the other. And of course, these are very complex topics that, I recommend you buy Dario Nardi's book and you read more about it. I'm not going to talk about it here in this video. In a future video, I do plan to talk more about this, but I want to always make sure that I have all of my information like completely, compact and, ready to like give in a more digestible manner and all of that. So it's taking a little bit of time to like bang around in my NITI so that I can understand it enough to be able to teach you guys on a deeper level. But at least from that right there, you see that there's two different ways on how you can use NI. Both are still NI users. But at the end of the day, one is using it in a more fixated kind of way, and then the other one is kind of like using it in a more like diffused and just like more like flexible kind of way. Like NI is not only future pacing and being able to like, run simulations and all of that, but it's also hopping into another person's mind, completely understanding that person's perspective, and hopping in their shoes. And then not only that person's perspective, but then everybody else's perspective, like a whole bunch of other people's, until it has this puzzle piece of what might be presenting the full picture, because it's detached enough from its own perspective to be able to see the puzzle piece of its own mind and how it fits in to the rest of the puzzle pieces of everybody's perspectives. That's a lot of P's. So that could also mean that introverted intuition / NI is often just maybe used for a lot of NFJs, especially just to like hop in people's perspectives and have meaning making. Now, of course, we will encourage an INFJ to start implementing more of their FE, and I talk about this all the time. When I'm coaching a lot of INFJs, I just see such a disdain for FE, and it's like, guys, if you don't use this function, then you're gonna really lack in life. You have to use this. We all love NI. Everybody loves NI, and it's a great function. But unless if you're using that extroverted judging function, then you're not gonna be able to get the best from that. We all love TI. Everybody loves TI. Like, oh, I want to be smart. But again, FE is what you're going to need if you're an NFJ. you're going to need to be using both FE and NI on a high level to be able to really get the things that you want. Those are your two strongest strengths. And so definitely try to like implement them and use the higher levels of FE, which is what I've seen that a lot of NFJs, they're seeing FE in a very like not nuanced kind of way. And that unfortunately is because, when you look at the internet and everything, you're just saying, oh, FE is nice and it it's about like people pleasing, and it's like, no, that's not what FE is. There is so many different facets to what FE is, and if you again read the Magic Diamond, he has a distinction between the two as well on there. And so when you look at the differences between FE over there and how even sometimes it could come off as TE, then like with the example of Raymond Reddington, a lot of people, including 16 Personalities, believe that Raymond Reddington from the Blacklist is an ENTJ, and I vehemently am against that. And I'm like, this is a clear misunderstanding of how FE works. Because we believe that, again, because he's able to do all this, whatever. In fact, if anything, Raymond Reddington creates a need for the people. If you watch the show, and I'm always talking about the Blacklist because that's what it is. So that's another thing that Raymond Reddington even does in the show. He kind of like hacks the system by making the people have a need so that he can meet that need and then have them rely on him in a way. And honestly, it's NFJ's crap, especially ENFJ's crap. And I'm just being honest, and so you have to have a deep understanding and nuanced understanding of your own functions and how you can better them and be able to implement them and, just overall develop them if that's what you are interested in. But just remember that introvert intuition has many different facets to it. It's not just the future pacing, and if anything, future planning would be NI plus TE, or maybe NI plus FE. But future pacing is what NI is, and if you are an NI Dom, then you're constantly future pacing, as in like you're constantly thinking, okay, what's going to happen? Let me run this simulation. How is this going to look like? How is that going to look like? Before you finally put in the TE to set things into motion. Or you fixate, okay, like this is the plan that I'm going to like go for, and this is how I'm going to execute that plan kind of thing. Or, okay, I'm going to create a need here, or I'm going to meet a need over here. But you may not always have that 5 to 10 year visionary view on things. That does not mean that you're not an NFJ or even an NTJ. But don't use it as an excuse also to be like, oh, okay, well, I'm an ISFP, and since I don't do that, then that's again, it's a different story. So let's not mistype ourselves. Anyway, thanks y'all for watching. If you have any questions, if you have any thoughts, definitely leave them behind. If you have any tips on how you as an NFJ have started to work through this process, definitely let me know. I learn a lot from you guys as well, so I can be able to teach my clients when I'm coaching them. Oh, somebody commented this, and I thought that was really interesting. We probed this thought in me, which then probed this practice that I could probably give you. And by this point, thankfully, I'm a lot more confident as a coach. I have a lot more, I've had a lot of hamsters, I've worked on a lot of different things. I've spoke to a lot of different people. I've consumed a lot of different content. And so, yeah, I'm really happy about where I'm at with all of this, and I'm glad that I can be able to help you guys, but y'all continue to help me, and let's make this a partnership. So I hope that this video was informative for you. Again, be sure to like, subscribe, share. If you want coaching, check out the description below. Again, leave any comments if you have any.